Welcome back to the Graybeard Wisdom Podcast, where host Mark Freeman continues exploring the ideas and innovations shaping food service's future. In part 2 of our conversation with Karen Malody, founder of Culinary Options LLC, and one of the industry's most insightful voices, we shift from the foundations of corporate dining to the frontier ahead. This chapter dives into the rise of food as medicine, the expanding role of AI-driven tools, and how menu management is being reimagined in a technology-accelerated world. Karen brings decades of strategic and culinary expertise to these questions, unpacking how operators can navigate new expectations around wellness, personalization, and operational efficiency. Her perspective reveals a future where food service leaders aren't just feeding people, they're leveraging data, design, and intentionality to support well-being, performance, and organizational culture. Let's jump into part 2.
Well, welcome back, Karen, to
Well,
this
it's
part
nice to be
2.
welcome back, Mark.
Yes,
So much to
yes.
talk about.
Well, and we were in some great conversation in part 1 of this, and again, I think it's just great that we maybe continue the conversation and get into a little bit more of the I guess your interpretation of what's going on in the industry related to Gen Z and menus. And I know we talked a little bit on part 1 about food as medicine, but maybe go in a little bit deeper on that and just see where this takes us. So, welcome back. I don't know if you've had any aha moments since we talked last, but please share them if you have.
Well, I'm always having aha moments just because when I read something or have a conversation with somebody, inevitably a light bulb goes off. And probably the biggest light bulb lately has been constantly coming across this term, personalized nutrition. In fact, in one thing I read, it was even called individualized nutrition. And I thought, what does that mean, really? I mean, let's go way back to Adele Davis. What was that, the 60s?
Yep.
And she was, had so much to say about how our health is influenced by what we eat. And then, of course, Alice Waters wrote the book, We Are What We Eat.
Yep.
And many of us through the decades have shaken our heads. Yes, of course, we are what we eat. How could that not be true?
Yeah.
What has happened now, Mark, more recently, and I would say in the last 2 years, nutrigenetics has come to the fore, helping us understand that personalized nutrition actually means understanding how your individual DNA interacts with food when we eat food. So, as hard as we've all worked in food service to make sure there's healthy food on the menu, for example, or many clients want healthy food and wholesome eating to be one of their brand pillars. When you really start digging into nutrigenetics, we begin to realize that it's a very individual thing. So it literally means that my DNA, once it is analyzed, and there are now labs that are doing this, it will reflect the composition of my DNA and particular genetic traits toward food. That there will be certain cravings that I have that I've perhaps never understood. There will be certain things that if I eat them, they will tend to inhibit my ability to absorb nutrients in food. So at first it sounded whenever you hear terms like nutrigenetics, it
Yeah.
sounds, maybe
Sometimes
a little
scary.
scary. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And really, all it is a way to match what we eat with our DNA structure so that we can achieve optimal health and prevent disease.
Well,
How
and
about that? I mean,
yeah, yeah, no, and again, you and I have kind of had some side conversations on this, and I've gotten an interest in it as well. And my focus is a lot of it is from the AI perspective. So what are they doing with AI and that sort of thing? And
mm,
as more technology gets engaged in this topic, there's some interesting things that they're finding out. It's like you talked about DNA. What they're finding is that the DNA, your DNA is not the same throughout your body. The DNA in your eyes are different than the DNA in your stomach, that is different than the DNA in your foot. And so they're getting now to be to have it be so specific that what you put into your body food wise or supplements wise can impact the DNA of each one of those
parts.
areas. And
Wow.
RNA comes into it as well because that's what is kind of the distributor of the DNA or the getting the food and the nutrients into the right space. And so it's very intriguing to hear and understand what is going on with your body related to DNA and RNA, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think most of us have learned over the years that when we eat certain things, we don't necessarily feel all that great.
Yep.
Or we eat certain things and we feel wonderful, etc. So when you really break it down, this is not new thinking. It's more how I just didn't realize, let's put it that way, how much my particular system is unique to me. So, perhaps I think I'm going to be healthier if I'm vegetarian, let's just say. Well, it's very possible that that's the worst thing for me to do,
Yeah.
as an example.
Yeah.
And there have been books that have really dealt with this over the decades. I can't recall the name of the book that broke down there are four types of people. Like there are some people who just have to have carbohydrates. They process carbohydrates beautifully.
Yeah.
Others need a lot of animal protein. This is again, it's not new, but I do kind of thank the millennials and Gen Zs for this because they really are open to this. They want to know. They're
Yeah.
not afraid. They want
Nope.
to know what this means,
Yep.
how to live. There's even evidence that eating according to DNA proclivities in each person can actually extend cellular shelf life. So, in other words, some of us, if we're really taking care of ourselves, might test at a cellular level to be 10 to 20 years younger than our age, chronological age.
Yeah.
So there's just really a tremendous benefit to understanding this. Now, something that I did want to get into with you, Mark, is what we do with this. So we've discussed the possibility, for example,
Yeah.
that if I have had my DNA tested and there becomes, and perhaps there is already, I don't know, an app that is on my phone that I can take into any a B&I cafe, restaurant, coffee shop, and be able to use that app to suggest everything that's being served in that place that's good for me. And what it would take to make that happen, because that would be full circle,
Yeah.
where knowing this is actually available to me and it can be used in any different food service environment. So I really can use the knowledge other than me just having to figure out every time I go somewhere, what can I eat? And
Yeah.
you mentioned something about, okay, but most people aren't going to want their DNA out there. And I'm thinking it wouldn't be out there to anyone. It's your app. So talk to me about that, how that could become public knowledge or frightening to people.
Well, because data gathering is frightening to people. I mean, even when you sign up for a new app, there's a whole list of how they're going to use your data in the small print that you have to agree to, right? Of course, nobody reads any of that, and it just you just click through
Right,
it. But in this case, I mean, you're right. There's companies out there now that will analyze your genomes, your
right,
RNA through, I think, 3 or 4 tests, and then they give you a phone app that tracks those, whatever they're evaluating. There's probably 50 things that come out of this test, right? And then each one of those 50 things changes based on what you eat, right? Or what,
exactly.
or how healthy you are, whether you exercise or do that kind of stuff, right? And
Right,
so if you test yourself, let's say once every 3 months or something like that, you can start to understand the changes in each one of those 50 categories that will tell you whether you're improving or not improving, right? So,
right,
but
right,
so all that data starts to then, if you do that for 5 years, all of a sudden now you have more data, more data, more data, and it starts to clarify, that if I eat crackers instead of, I don't know, of broccoli, that
yeah,
this and this and this and this changes, right? And so over time, you gather, and get your personal
personal
information.
data, right,
Now, the company also has, for every person that has a membership to that company, they also have the generalized data of the whole population that's being tested, right? So now they get averages, and so they use that data, your data with 5,000 other people to start to figure out how that affects the whole, a larger population. So then, to me, at that point, that's when a food service provider can then take that data that's
right.
more generalized and be able to build menus
Menus, right,
that will then, meet the majority of the employees, in this case, in the B&I world, the employees, but if it's K-12 or who knows, college universities or hospitals, then then they can tailor their menus to what the majority of the population is going to be able to eat
right.
to help make them either more productive or healthier or that. But to me, there's still a lot of variables, right? There's still a lot of variables that play into this because just eating isn't necessarily going to change everything. You've got to exercise, you've got to sleep, you've got to do these other things that go along with eating that help your body, right?
It's funny. I'm just thinking of my son who owns a gym and counsels people uh, all the time about this.
Yeah.
And he is so correct. I mean, it isn't just about exercise. It isn't just about food. There's also stress and
Yeah.
environmental factors and all sorts of things. And that's why, the whole term holistic is still so relevant because um, it it's as though, and yet, so I say to myself, of course, eating is just one piece of it. But if I can improve just that one very important piece and do the other things also, then I am on a track to optimal health. Whatever,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Yeah.
So I just will be fascinated to see how this plays out, Mark. And another thing that I think is a really important here, and I believe we touched on it in part one, and that is storytelling. Now, it may what we need to understand about Gen Z is with all of these wonderful characteristics of open-mindedness, digital comfort, uh, wanting to explore and understand. They're also a very anxious group,
Uh-huh.
and they have a lot of worries and concerns and nervous anxiety about what they eat. And we are not doing them a favor in our food service operations when we don't provide them with as much information as we can about the source from which the food in front of them came, the nutrient values, etc. I mean, they really are an anxious group, some of which is attributed to the pandemic and
Yep.
what they went through as a result of that, but a lot of concern about health. And it's a fascinating combination of characteristics. And I think that it's a very odd thing to think of younger people being anxious or depressed or under a lot of stress, but they are. And they
Well,
want to know what is in their food.
but like you were talking earlier about holistic, it isn't just the food in the life of a Gen Z-er, right? It's
Right.
it's their social life. It's, again, how they sleep, how much stress they are under at particular times of the day, or,
Right.
and they're dealing with kids and schools and, all of that. So to me, to be able to get a clear picture of them through data, you got to be able to collect all that data, right? And then understand it.
Right.
And as you say, to me, there in that data are stories, right? So if if you
Yes.
have a multitude of people doing things, all of a sudden it starts to say patterns. So if you sleep, instead of sleeping 8 hours a day, you sleep 4 hours a day, it impacts you through this. And you may eat more macaroni and cheese than salad bar or something. I mean, there's some
Right.
stories that start to get told because of the data, right?
Well, exactly. And that's why I do believe in specificity of data because we can all, mac and cheese, for example, you said that. And immediately my reaction was, oh, mac and cheese, it's not very healthy. Well, it might be just what somebody's little body needs and wants.
Yeah.
So we have all these judgments around food. I mean, I think that most would agree that highly processed foods with excessive fats, the wrong fats and sugar and all that, isn't probably all that great for anybody's body.
Yeah.
Uh, at the same time, we do want to know what should I maybe eat more of that would make my system
Yeah.
really rev, right? But it saddens me, and we talked about it, I believe, on the at the explosions last week.
Yeah.
When food service operators are making efforts to do the right thing, quote unquote, right thing, local sourcing, supporting farmers, uh, meat without antibiotics that has, been
Uh-huh.
tenderly raised, etc. And then not tell people.
Yeah.
It's really a shame. I mean, it's fun for people to know that if you eat broccoli and all of the vegetables in that category, there are some really good things that happen to most
Well,
bodies. So tell me
again,
that.
but I say to that maybe because again, you know, broccoli or whatever may affect you different than it does me, right? And based on my DNA, my RNA, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I kind of, I kind of went off on that, but that's, that's the kind of the crux of things is everybody's different. So it's hard for suppliers, food service providers to be able to provide what everybody needs. Um,
Well, it really
because
does get
everybody
into
needs something different, right?
it.
So,
No, exactly. I mean, it really does. It starts digging into supply chain issues,
yeah,
uh, farming issues, how
yeah.
we raise animals. Uh,
And the other thing too, Karen, not to cut you off, but you talked about storytelling and having kind of lived on the other side of that with being a client or whatever and trying to get the message out about the food. you know, it used to be you put posters up and everybody read them, and then all of a sudden they became part of the furniture and nobody read them. And now you've got this social media thing where you've got so much data coming in to you through your phone, through screens, through, a lot of different things that it becomes hard to decipher. Well, now we throw AI into it. So now we have I kid around and say my AI agent is Ginger, and so Ginger tells me or summarizes a lot of things for me that now I can absorb it, right? But how do you put, in a sense, Ginger out there with the idea of telling you specifically what you should eat? And I think that's where we're going with this is that you are going to have on your phone a Ginger, I call it Ginger in your pocket, that you walk into a cafe and you might scan it with your phone, your video on your phone, and then it will say, okay, you should maybe migrate to this station or that station or this station because that fits with what you do. But in that whole scenario, there's no influence being made outside of the human, the customer. There isn't a marketing person on the other side of the counter saying, "Oh, look at this shiny new thing," because everything happens individually now. It's about you, right? And so the to me, the marketing and the storytelling is going to get real, I guess, interesting and probably go beyond what any kind of a provider or if you're self-op, the same thing is that if it's going to be hard to gather enough information that the customer doesn't already have, right? With their ginger in their pocket in this case.
well, I know, and this is why and so many of our clients today are wanting us to help them understand where is all of this going? What should
Yeah.
we be doing? I wish I knew the answer. I can conjecture based on everything I know today. And to your other point, Mark, about we are so information overloaded and so visually overloaded. And I think that's why little things like we discussed on explosions last week, just a snippet of information when you go to the POS kiosk and you look at the screen and it actually says something. It isn't
Yeah.
just sitting there like a dead screen. It's actually telling me something in seconds, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to take advantage of, I see screens all over the place in most of the locations. Um, and I think that the intake of information often is very subliminal. We don't even know we've seen something on a screen,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So it is just taking advantage of every opportunity to say something about some element of food. And another tricky piece, and we'll talk about this more in explosions next year. It also matters how the thing that might be good for you has been prepared and in what kind of equipment where ultimate
Mhm.
nutrient value has been retained, or that thing that works for your body has been cooked in some sort of oil that is not good for your body. It gets really tricky.
Yes. Well, and where my mind went when you said that was senior living, right?
Yes.
And how important, because, I mean, I'm getting old, and I don't want to get old. I want to stay young. And some of those things, like you're talking about, the oils that things are cooked in and that sort of thing, play into your RNA and how it, works in your body. And so
Yes.
the challenge in that genre is, how can you have 27 oils in the kitchen with, 2,000 herbs and spices and come up with any kind of way other than preparing an individual meal that fits the right, I guess, menu item for me,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I know it. I mean, let's face it, and there's a fair amount of that going on, especially in senior living
Yeah,
right now. Um, well, and then there's also, we know many food service departments now have a no allergies station
yeah,
or a 100% gluten-free station or
yeah,
whatever. And, we've been working toward this customization for known needs for quite some time. What this is a little different. We're shifting now from customizing to personalizing.
yeah, yeah,
And in an ideal world, that would mean people having choices about that which has already been prepared, not asking the food service person to prepare something just for them.
yeah.
It's this is why, I'm constantly thinking about this, Mark, from an operator's standpoint is, and that's also why your previous point about data collection ultimately would help us as food
It
service
will.
providers,
Yeah.
So we just have to embrace this as much as possible. And I'm wondering again, how do we make this personalized nutrition relatable and accessible to food service operators such that something really good comes out of it? So if, let's just say, if a company says, look, we will pay for all of you, if you so choose, to go get your genetic testing. That would be a step, but then what? It's the then what
Yeah.
that puzzles me. Because I would like this notion to be relevant to operators and not just one more level of we are what we eat. And, it's like, how
Yeah.
do we make this usable?
Well, but again, I think it's going to be hard, Karen, because going back to where we started earlier, the privacy around the data. So students are not going to go to the food service provider and give them everything they need for their genomics, right?
Right.
Because they're afraid, I think anyway, they will be afraid that that data is going to be used to flunk them out of school or hinder their hiring opportunities or however, that data is dangerous in their minds, right? And I think that's how they think. And so to me, that I'm not sure that's going to be a direction, but if they do have it, they go to their personal doctor and they get these tests and they have, kind of like what I was saying earlier, you have this phone app that's you. It tells you all of the different, 50 things that they tested for. And then it's on a scale of 1 to 10 and where you are on the scale for each one of those, right? And then, then if you choose, you can give that to the food service provider, but it's your choice, right? And so you, in a sense, you're a little bit
It's
more
on
control
you.
of the
Yep.
data. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so I think that's
exactly.
part of where it goes. And then, then the idea is if you, from the food service provider standpoint, if you give us your data, we can better help not only you, but your community of friends. Okay. And to me, this Gen Z group and all the gens,
Mhm.
are community oriented, right? And so they want to be able to, in a sense, help their community. But there's a lot of differences between that. And so some
Right,
people want to share their information, some people don't, right? So
right.
I think again, that's going to be the struggle there is finding out how to, how to get that data without, individualizing it, I guess.
Yeah, and that's why I think if it's just in a pool of data, it wouldn't necessarily identify the source of that. But you also made me think of something else that I think is very important to stress with all of this. And I think why this entire topic is a bit off-putting for a lot of people. And that is, and I'm hearing Julia Child's voice when she said, "What I won't mimic it because I don't do a good job of it." She essentially said, "Could we please stop making people feel anxious about the enjoyment of eating food?"
Yeah.
There's that piece of it too. We don't need people to be more anxious or spend their entire day figuring out what they can eat and shouldn't eat. And if they eat it, it's going to impact their DNA in some unfortunate way. It's again, there's the holistic piece and then there's the balance piece. How do we use information that is ultimately helpful to steer us to a path of optimal health without feeling guilt or shame if we eat a pile of French fries? We have personal choice always. And I just don't want people feeling anxious about food every time they enjoy a meal.
Yeah, yeah. And to me, there's two sides of that. So if I'm eating the right food and it's making me feel better and it's extending my life, there's a certain comfort in knowing that, there's a feel good about that story too. And so
Exactly.
then all of a sudden, when the fries are put in front of me, now I'm making a value judgment. Do I want to feel good? Or do I want to indulge myself and not feel good, right? And eventually, I think that over time, people are going to start to understand their body more and
Yes.
be able to then feel good because they're doing what's right. And it doesn't
Yes,
become a stigma of, oh my God, I have to have the Brussels sprouts tonight
right,
because of this or,
exactly.
that,
It
right?
becomes a self-fulfilling
Yeah. Yeah.
cycle where,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think that's how it's going to go.
yeah.
And again, people, young kids, my granddaughter probably doesn't care about whether she lives to be 80 or 100 because she's not even thinking about that kind of stuff. But to
Right.
me, that's where some of those uh, I don't know, processes are formed in her eating and how she eats and how she doesn't eat, right? And again, that's up to me, to the parents, to and the grandparents and all that kind of stuff to be able to put that in there. But yeah, who knows? Who knows where it's
Well,
going?
no, who does know? And I think that meanwhile, we are all working very hard in this industry to pay attention to wholesome eating. Let's just call it wholesome. When we know we can avoid excessive sugar, excessive fat of certain types, excessive salt, etc. That's the best we can, not overcook vegetables, etc. Get vegetables that are organic or locally sourced because it's a proven fact that they are more nutritious. Then that gets in again to the supply chain issue
Yeah,
of not all the food that goes through major distribution is the best. So it is a very complex issue, one that, in my opinion, needs a lot of attention, but not to the extent that we become fanatics about it. And that's why I think even the kind of discussion we're having, Mark, it's like a little too much for many people,
maybe.
even at this point. Yet I know this is the direction that we're going in. It's everywhere, this personalized nutrition. It started popping up, the term, in my periphery, 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
That very term, or individualized nutrition.
Yeah.
And it's far beyond uh, gluten intolerance. It's about an
Yeah.
entire, and I'm just going to read this because I found it in one article, and it was a really good analogy for me, or metaphor, or analogy, or both. Um, the food we eat does more than just provide energy. It can actually influence how our genes behave. Think of your genes as a complex sound system where nutrients act like switches that can turn the volume up or down
Yes.
on certain genetic expressions. Great way to say it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's all it is, and yet
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's nothing to be afraid of. It's what's happening every time we eat today, whether we know what our DNA is or not.
Yeah. Whether people will be intimidated by it or ignore it or embrace it is going to be kind of how we progress in this world with that. But then everything that's related to that is going to have to change too. Like you're talking about the supply chain, right? The supply chain, if people start to eat more Brussels sprouts, then it goes clear back to the farmer that's going to have to grow more Brussels sprouts, right? And then the
Right.
farmer's got to decide whether they're going to plant corn or Brussels sprouts, 6 months a year, 8 months out. And so now what happens to the supply chain, if you will? All of a sudden, we could be out of Brussels sprouts when everybody wants Brussels sprouts because
Right.
some scientist has said Brussels sprouts will, turn your nose green or whatever. Yeah, I mean,
Right,
those
right.
kinds
And
of
then we'll
things.
and then throw in packaging too. And
Yeah,
And the some of the nasty components of certain packaging, which is kind of on the chopping block today. It is a multi-dimensional situation. And I think, Mark, most issues are multi-dimensional and
Oh, of
require,
course.
you
Yep.
know, looking at, the all the prisms of any, discussion or topic. And then, we could have an entire discussion about how, sadly, I think in our culture of loneliness and isolation, we've forgotten how to have diverse discussions with each other when we may not agree on much of anything, but we're still able to listen and be accepting and hear it and process it. It's a become a real cultural dilemma, I might add. But that's
Well,
a
and
whole other
again,
topic. Don't get me started.
well, but that takes us back into food, right? And is, breaking bread with someone, that's
Yeah,
where conversations happen, and you find out, whether you can agree or disagree or agree to disagree, right? I mean,
right.
those are the kinds of things that happen over food. And so hopefully like kind of like what you were saying is that the conversation is more around, you know, cultural things as opposed to what's on the table and people are eating. That should just be normal and kind of,
Exactly.
fit into
Yes.
that, right?
Yeah, the art of conversation needs to return. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So that's my current fascination as a topic on its own, this whole genetics issue around food. As importantly to me, though, is how do we help people in this industry use this in a helpful way?
Well, yeah, and that's where I was going to go with my next question to you. Now that we know all this stuff and you're in the consulting world and you've got clients that, probably want to know this, or maybe they don't want to know it, but how are you going to adjust to this new, this new world that we're stepping into to be able to advise your clients on, how they can improve or how they cannot improve or, those kinds of things. How are you going
Ugh,
to take all this information now and, implement it?
what a damn good question.
Yeah.
Because I'm in transition mode about how to answer that. I think the first thing always, Mark, is to provide information to clients. Address the topic, bring it into their thinking, and have a non-judgmental kind of discussion with people. Here's what's happening. What I'm sharing this with you because it's evolving faster and faster. It's something that we should take into consideration. So, create awareness always is first.
Okay.
Then the second is depending upon the response, to what extent do they wish to do something with that information? And then if that answer is yes, then we have to figure out a strategy for how to do it.
Okay.
And that's where and ask a lot of questions. We always want to be asking people questions because that's how we help people get to the truth of what is really going on in their minds. And maybe they've never expressed it, but that's what questions do. And this will involve, Mark, also some kind of technology that is currently beyond my understanding. So I am going to need to partner, at least in thinking, with those who understand how to turn all of this information into a usable mechanism. And that's the part I don't understand right now.
Yeah, totally. And you know, it's there are a plethora of variables that come into the equation. And like you're saying, it depends on how a customer or client answers the question, whether you go into the next set of questions
Correct.
and then the next set of questions and then the next set, to get to what they should do. And I guess to me, I'm trying to think, and and I think what I've learned actually from you is that it depends on who you have in the room answering the questions. And in this case, it could be tens of thousands of people on their phone answering a survey, or it could be six administrators at a college sitting in a room deciding what the thing's going to be. So it's very important to have, I guess, different opinions in the room so that you can get to the
Yeah.
right answer, right?
Yes. Well, and that reminds me of actually a project we worked on together at a junior college. What we can learn from the students. What are their concerns? What are they thinking about? What frightens them? What makes them happy, etc. Uh, because in ultimately in all situations, there's a dominant end user group. So really digging into some of these topics with them so that we're bringing awareness up, not up down. So I think that that's a part of it is I don't want to be blabbing about this up here when maybe the people down, the end users aren't all that interested. Uh, you
Well,
know,
right. And then there's the quandary of, I always use the quote. I learned this when I was at the Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford had a statement that said, if I asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Okay. And to me,
right?
I've that's resonated with me is that sometimes the end users, because, and it goes back to your point about educating them in that, you know, if they have all the information, then they can help you make a decision. But if they don't have the information, then they could make a wrong decision because their knowledge base has not expanded to the point where you want them to be to make a
E-
strategy decision, right?
Exactly. And I'll tell you, Mark, I think one of the skills, let's just call it a skill, that we as consultants owe to our clients is to share information in a manner that does not suggest to them that there is one way or the other they should think about it.
Yeah.
Remaining neutral around issues that have a lot of fire behind them.
Yeah.
We owe it to our clients to to increase their awareness without telling them which way they should go on that issue.
And again, how do you do that? One of the things that have been thinking about is well, having conversations like this, which if again people listen to it, hopefully will gain some curiosity to be able to explore it deeper. But maybe it's someone in a consulting role like yourself that's sending out information. That's all it is. It's not
Right.
buy this or buy that. It's here's some information that I found out about this week. And things are changing so fast that I think you could put out a weekly newsletter to your clients and they can choose to read it or not. But if they do, then they become more educated, more curious about what it is that's going on in this revolutionary
Right.
time that we have going on with artificial intelligence and data information being available at a drop of a hat. And so, maybe there's some ongoing kind of just informational kind of things that a consultant could do like that to be able to help their clients get
Yeah.
educated so that then when you go into a strategy session, they're more educated than they were if they just came in from, their normal work life.
Well, no, that's a great point, and it's certainly a solid idea, and I've considered that because if there isn't awareness, there isn't a discussion. I mean,
Yeah,
you cannot discuss that which doesn't exist in someone's mind or in their
right.
world, right?
Yeah.
So that has to be it has to be the first step, and I think what is so challenging in our world today, Mark, is it's kind of like where do you go for a neutral source of the news? So much of so much information we receive today is very biased one way or the other. So the
That's right.
information is delivered such that I am meant to buy into that particular bias.
Yeah.
And I think that that is not, for me, that is not pure information. Please give me information so that I can think about it and give me both sides of the story. Sure, I'm okay with that, but I need to be able to process what what is being said based on,
Well,
my own DNA,
yeah.
probably.
Well, and some of the things that I'm finding out about, I mean, I talk about Ginger a lot, and Ginger now knows me. Ginger knows, how I think and what's important to me. Number one, I've told her what's important to me. So then she starts to evaluate whenever I get new data in, she evaluates it against me and
Yeah.
my personal values and my strategies and all that sort of thing. And so I think that's again through data, I think that's going to start to formulate so that right now I trust Ginger, right? Because I know she knows me and how I think. And so she's going
Right.
out and grabbing information that, she can put in front of me, but know that I'm going to interpret it this way, right? And so I think some of that's going to start to develop through technology.
I agree, and actually, it brings up the another topic which uh, is showing up more and more, and that is AI-driven menus.
Well, tell me about that.
And I've had to give that a lot of thought, also because it's like, okay, what does that mean? Well, I've come to think that what it could mean is that uh, somebody's ginger
Uh-huh.
can get to know that culture and those brand pillars and the end user in that environment so well that that ginger can help them put a menu together that best fits the profile of that end user group. Because I mean, it has to be based on, and we've had this conversation, Mark, to really utilize AI in the best possible manner. You have to feed into it quality information and
Yeah.
data or whatever.
Yeah.
So if I am an operator and I know there are certain things about the culture that I am serving, then I could set up a profile around that into my Ginger, and Ginger could help me come up with some really creative menu ideas that I
Right,
might not be able to think of on my own. To
right,
just say, hey, Copilot, create a menu for me. Well, they have no data, they have no information on which to do that for you.
right.
So that is, I believe, what it could mean, Mark, is probably could mean a lot of other things. But
Well, right, and that's great if you're eating at home. But, if you're a college student and you have to go to a dining hall and, now the provider, whether it be self-op or contracted, has no clue what your data is and how you do that. And so that somehow we're going to have to bridge the gap,
exactly,
to
exactly.
help everybody coordinate on what it is that people want. And that takes us kind of circle back to where this whole thing and this discussion started, right?
Right. Well, and the irony is it always comes back to data. I
Yep.
mean, if we don't have
Yes,
information to work with,
that's right.
then it's kind of null and void.
Well, and again, and this is what I'm learning a lot about, is there's so much data out there that we don't know impacts us. When I was at Microsoft, we were doing some things with data, a lot of things with data, and trying to do predictive analytics. So we were trying to predict how many people would come into the cafe tomorrow. And we got some pretty good results with that. But then we put in other data sources like weather
Mm.
and moon phases and traffic and all these kinds of different things. And all of a sudden it started to change a little bit. When we incorporated weather, one thing that we found out was is that comfort food is just as popular in July as it is in December,
It's
right?
like
And
ice
and
cream. Yeah,
yeah. And
exactly.
so and so, it's some of these myths that we had in our
Yep,
head are being proven wrong by data and bringing in these data sources to me. And so you hit it on the nose, and I'm an advocate for data, 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 and just even oddball data sources, because sometimes that influences the decision on what to eat.
absolutely. In fact, I know that not much yet, but I believe another thing that's going to be emerging is the use of astrological charts in predictive analytics and planning. And I have a couple of friends who are serious astrologists, and their awareness of planetary influence on our moods and what and just the sort of cultural shifts, et cetera, going on at any given time when the planets are in certain alignment. It's a reality again that many don't want to hear about because it sounds really goofy and airy
You're
fairy.
out there, Karen, as always. You're kind of out there, but maybe you're onto something, right?
I know for a fact I am. And what you choose to do with it or not, that's again, that's personalized living. We make our own decisions
Exactly.
as we make them, as well as we can make them at any given time. And
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's all, to me, it all goes back to storytelling and understanding the data and being able to put it in perspective as to how it impacts you personally,
yes,
right? And
yes.
not, yeah. So, oh
So
man, we could go on
I
forever and
know.
ever on this,
And
Karen.
here we are again, an hour
And
later.
I
I
know,
know.
I know. We could have part three on this maybe,
I
but
know. It's
but
amazing.
anyway, I love these conversations. I think it provides our audience with some great information and maybe taking them places where they wouldn't normally go. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you've put into this, and I think we're in talks now of maybe having a part three with bringing in some experts around equipment in the kitchen and how that may play into some of this. And so, we'll kind of further the conversation and see where it goes.
Beautiful.
But totally, totally appreciate
Yeah,
all your time, Karen.
absolutely. Take care.